And we're following what the papers are writing about this big summit at the White House later today. The Wall Street Journal editorial has a new piece asking what kind of peace in Ukraine. It reads in part, President Trump conducts foreign policy on personal instinct and tactical impulse, and his abrupt Friday turn on Russia and Ukraine is a classic illustration. Whether it's the start of a road to peace or to appeasement is impossible to know. We're not sure if Mr. Trump knows himself. No wonder Russian commentators and Putin and allies were celebrating the summit's results. Their president ended his isolation in the West, made no public concessions, and can continue killing Ukrainians without further sanction. The president can say all he wants, that this is Joe Biden's war, not his, but like it or not, what happens next is on his watch. A defeat for Ukraine will echo at home and across the world for the rest of his presidency. Well, the editors of the National Review, meanwhile, they're also writing about the no-deal summit and the path to peace in Ukraine. In part, their story reads, quote, Putin can claim wins of more consequence than a photo op. Above all, he dodged any requirement to pay a fresh price for his failure to agree to a ceasefire. This is a significant climb down by Trump. This matters. Without a preliminary ceasefire, it will be hard to proceed to the more formal armistice that remains the most likely form of eventual peace deal. For any American intervention to be successful, before long it will, however chummy the talks in Alaska, have to involve more stick as well as carrot. Trump should remember that while patience is a virtue, being a patsy is not. In the aftermath of the meetings, he wants to hold off on further sanctions for now. That's fine. But in the absence of progress toward a ceasefire, in fairly short order, he should resume turning the sanctions racket. David Ignatius, I mean, that's two conservative points of view, clearly coming from the more hawkish, traditional Republican Party point of view. What's your take on what happens now outside of the White House and outside of this meeting? If things carry on this path, are there any avenues for the Senate, for the Republican Party to carry on putting pressure on the White House to support Ukraine, or does it all really hinge on this meeting today?
So, Katie, President Trump has shown that he's able, really, I think, to fend off Republican pressure. And although Lindsey Graham and others,
despite what those papers might be writing,
yeah, well, I just think recent history shows us that. One way to think about what's happening today and in the succeeding days is this war has been about whether Ukraine can become a Western country. That's been the aspiration of the Ukrainian people, and it was intolerable to Putin and to Russia. And Russia really fought a war to prevent Ukraine from becoming European. If the United States today, by offering security guarantees to whatever part of Ukraine emerges from the war intact, so that that country can be, as South Korea became, as West Germany became, a part of the West with our guarantees of security behind them, then that's an outcome that's going to make for a more prosperous Ukraine. In the long run, I can't imagine that the rest of Ukraine won't move as East Germany moved with West Germany. That's down the road. But the key thing is whether the United States really will stand behind Ukraine's sovereignty against Putin. If that happens today, then I think there's some reason for optimism. If it doesn't, it's a cave into Putin's power.
Hey, David, it's Heilman here. I just want to pick up on a little bit on where you just ended up, but where a couple of unanswered questions from the first block of the show. I know there are obviously these European leaders who are coming to the White House today are not all of exactly one mind, but I think it's fair to say that there's, broadly speaking, among all of them, a certain set of concerns. What's the downside scenario for this group? They're showing up there fearing the worst. The worst looks like what today?
So, John, to me, the worst would be Trump leans on Zelensky to give up all of the Donbass, this area in eastern Ukraine. Zelensky refuses for political reasons. He says, I can't. It violates my constitution and my people don't want it. And the Europeans, although talking tough, don't stand up to what will be Trump's demand. You've got to give up that territory. This is the peace deal I've made for you. And they stand behind Trump rather than Zelensky. That's the scenario that I view as most threatening. That at the end of this process, you'd end up with Ukraine having to make concessions without getting anything sufficient in return to guarantee its security.
Well, that's
that
what
would be it.
That's what I was going to ask you. How much do you think Ukraine will be willing to give up if, in fact, they get a rock-solid security guarantee where the European countries and Donald Trump say, we're going to be in Ukraine, the U.S. is going to be supporting us, we're all going to be rebuilding your country, and we're going to tell Vladimir Putin in no uncertain terms that an attack against Ukraine is attack against the United States and Great Britain and France and Germany and Italy and the EU. At that point, when he gets that rock-solid assurance, if he gets that rock-solid assurance, at that point, do you think the land deal can be made?
So, Joe, he has to be able to sell this to the Ukrainian people. And they have suffered in this war so much. Just think about bombardment every night, spending much of that night awake, which has been the case for much of this year for Ukrainians in Kyiv and elsewhere. He has to sell it to this, war-weary people and say, we got something. We're giving up this land, and it's a dagger in our heart. But what we got was security, our ability to be a free European country. So I think it depends in how this is phrased. If the appearance at the end of today is of the Western countries, the United States and Europe, marching together with Ukraine, even as it makes this terrible concession of land, that may be something that Zelensky can take home, and the Ukrainians would say it was worth the sacrifices we made. But there's a lot of resistance to it. Again, I just share with your viewers the feeling of standing in St. Michael's Square, looking at pictures of Ukrainians who died in Donetsk, in Luhansk, since 2014. There are hundreds of photos, as far as you can see, of people who died in this war. So giving it up is not going to be easy.
John Meacham, there's also another interested observer today, and that's going to be Xi Jinping of China, who's going to see what the U.S. and the West is willing to do to stand up for a smaller country invaded by a larger one. So speak to us just about how precarious this moment is, big picture here, as we really barrel into this new century with the sense of, almost a return to a great powers setup where, there are spheres of influence and potentially aggression can be rewarded or at least go relatively unpunished. John? I think we've lost Meacham's
John either froze or he fell asleep and, considering... John...
I had a lot of wise things to say there.
Well, yeah, but it looked like you were in the middle of one of your over 80s matches at your country club. John always asks if he can play in the over 80s, bracket. And
it's very important to be able to play within the oxygen tent.
Yes, exactly. All right, now, John, you're being paid to give deep thoughts. Go.
Deep thoughts. The deep thought here to Jonathan's question is, it is a great power competition. We are, interestingly, in 2025, back to 1914. This is interesting question whether is this the pre-World War I era that has reasserted itself at the end of what we all took, the lessons we all took from World War II and the Cold War, which was an implacability, an unconditional surrender. One of the reasons I think this conversation is uncomfortable for a lot of people conversant with American history is that we don't really talk. We didn't really talk about negotiating in the middle of the 20th century, right? We didn't talk about doing this after FDR announced unconditional surrender in the Second World War, somewhat surprising Churchill at Casablanca. We didn't talk about it so much during Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, because we had made a stand. It's a long twilight struggle, and we represented the West. And as Ronald Reagan said, his view of the Cold War was, we win, you lose. This is not that. right? This is something in between. And I think it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me to think, okay, we're going to award this aggression. But yes, you get a collective security agreement. Okay, but you wouldn't need it if the aggression had not happened. So what is all that? That's the tragedy of history. And so what we're going to see today in Washington is a remarkable gathering of European leaders who are trying to find the best, worst option.
So, David Ignatius, as we wrap up the segment, I want to read from you something from the New Statesman on Friday out of Britain. And I read it to you because you knew Dr. Brzezinski so well. This was a review of Zabig, Ed Luce's biography on Dr. Brzezinski, and the parallels are striking. This summer, in between hosting J.D. Vance and visiting Switzerland, David Lammy, the foreign minister of Great Britain, had been reading Edward Luce's Zabig, The Life of Zbigniew Brzezinski. The book charts the intellectual political rivalry between the Polish-born U.S. diplomat and Henry Kissinger. While Kissinger championed a foreign policy centered on the great powers, an approach Lammy regards as cynical, Brzezinski consistently advocated for smaller countries, noting how they can act as geopolitical pivots, which Lammy considers to be overly cynical. And of course, as you know, starting in 1950, Dr. Brzezinski said the Soviet Union will fall from within, most likely when these small countries start breaking away. And of course, it was his own home country, Poland, that did that. I am struck by watching Donald Trump's foreign policy approach, seeing how much it reflects Kissinger's in that it's about the great powers. It's about China, Russia, America, and everybody else be damned. Well, that didn't work. Brzezinski's smaller countries, where you look at the Polands, you look at the Ukraines, you look at the smaller countries in the orbits of these larger powers to actually see where it matters. So I'm fascinated how history repeats itself and how we're actually looking at in what we've seen thus far in the Trump administration, more of a Kissinger great powers détente approach that in the end was a historical failure.
So, Joe, it's a great point. Trump so far has been about the big guys, you know, the big deals between the big, powerful leaders with whom he feels affinity. Dr. Brzezinski had the genius to see Eastern Europe as a series of individual countries, each of which mattered in a different way. And I would say, as we look at the events today, the United States and all of its European allies, and it does seem like this is an alliance again, are treating Ukraine as an individual country with its own aspirations and a deep yearning to be part of Europe. It's something Brzezinski would have loved. I remember in one of our conversations, he spoke about the way in which Ukraine moving west toward Europe could be the first step of a broader process that would finally bring Russia, balanced between Asia and Europe, more towards the West. That seems impossibly far away now, but that was part of Dr. Brzezinski's vision. And let's hope that this intense focus on Ukraine is getting away from the big guys and thinking about the little guys and their security.
The Washington Post's David Ignatius and historian John Meacham, our thanks to you both. Thank you, gentlemen. Good.